What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be comparing the Reflex sight to the Elo sight in Infinite Warfare. This is one of the most common questions I get lately, so I thought it was finally time to just make a video on it. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so starting this off, if we're just looking into the menus of the Reflex and the Elo, if you look at the bars down below, the Reflex sight will give you +3 to accuracy and +3 to range, whereas the Elo only gives you +3 to accuracy. Keep in mind, and this applies to so many other things, not just the optics, these in-game stat bars are essentially meaningless. Never pay attention to these whatsoever. Sometimes they will give you a general indication of what something does, like suppressor reduces your range for instance, but oftentimes they are just completely false and they don't match up with what's actually hard-coded in the game. So keep in mind, using a Reflex sight does not increase your range at all. Also, these have no impact on recoil values or idle sway or anything like that, so accuracy is technically not affected either, although one could make the argument that it makes for a clearer sight picture, which does help with your accuracy in an indirect sort of way. So now that we've got that covered, let's cover the most important part of this, and technically the only statistical difference between the Elo and the Reflex is the Elo will allow you to aim down sight 10 milliseconds faster. So this means that if you're running the game at 60 frames per second, it will usually allow you to aim down sight 1 frame sooner than a Reflex sight would. But the big thing to keep in mind is that's without Quick Draw equipped. If you do have Quick Draw, you're cutting those times down to a point where they technically are going to be aiming down sight on the exact same frame. So essentially this difference is negligible, but it is worth noting that the Elo is coded to aim down sight just that little tiny bit faster than the Reflex. Also, I should point out, just for clarity's sake, that the Reflex sight doesn't change your aim down sight time at all. So with an assault rifle that aims down sight in 250 milliseconds with iron sights, it will take the same amount of time with a Reflex. Same thing goes with an LMG. If the base gun with just iron sights aims down sight in 300 milliseconds, it will also aim down sight in 300 milliseconds with a Reflex. Getting to the next aspect that we want to look at with these sights is our field of view, or essentially how far are we zoomed in while using these sights. While I don't have the hard stats on this, and I remember there was like a 0.00 something % difference between the Elo and the Reflex in Black Ops 3, which very well could be the case in this game, based on my hand testing, they look to be completely identical when it comes to field of view. Another thing that's also interesting to point out is with an Elo or a Reflex, you actually don't zoom in as much as you would with the iron sights on an assault rifle. I thought for sure that it zoomed you in a little bit more than iron sights would on an assault rifle, but that's not the case at all, and you can see that here as I fade from the iron sights on the NV4 to the Elo sight here. Keep in mind though, this is per weapon class, so with an SMG, yes, with an Elo you are going to be zooming in more than you would be without an Elo sight, or with just an iron sight for instance. So this is per weapon class, but just know with assault rifles, you're actually zooming out just slightly when you pop on a Reflex or an Elo. The final thing I want to compare here is just the overall silhouette and how obstructive the sight would be on a gun. We're going to use the NV4 just as our example here, just because it's the most used gun in the game, so why not? The first silhouette you can see here is when you have the Reflex sight. You can see just how much of the screen that it covers. Now we're going to fade into an iron sight on the NV4, and you'll see that the iron sight actually covers less of the screen because you look at the sights at a different angle. You look at it from a lower angle, so it changes the entire silhouette of the gun. Now finally, we're going to have a look at the Elo sight, and that's even smaller because you're looking at it once again at a slightly different angle, and you'll see that the Elo is the least obstructive sight out of these three. This is probably the biggest reason that most people will choose an Elo over a Reflex sight. It's not so much about the aim down sight time, it's more so the silhouette and how much it could potentially obstruct your vision. Keep in mind though, this is a bit of a subjective area. Some people like the Reflex sight, myself included on some guns for some reason. I like the Reflex sight because I feel like it frames my target a little bit better because I've got that full frame around my sight. So this definitely is subjective to an extent, but just know that you're obstructing your vision a little bit more when you're running a Reflex versus an Elo. I know I said that was the final thing, but I actually thought of one more thing that I'm going to tack on the end here. The Elo sight displays your ammo count just below the dot, which a lot of people are going to be finding very helpful, especially for hardcore players. Because in hardcore, we don't get the full heads-up display, so we can never actually see how many rounds are left in our magazine. This kind of solves that problem, and the Reflex sight doesn't give us this ammo count, so that's a significant advantage that the Elo has, at least for hardcore game modes. For me personally, as more of a core player, I almost never catch myself looking at the ammo count on the sight itself, I just instinctively look towards the bottom right of the screen to see my ammo count there. So that's going to wrap it up for the comparison between the Reflex and the ELO sight in Infinite Warfare. Overall, what's the verdict on this? I would say it mainly does come down to personal preference, but the ELO does seem to have a lot of advantages over the Reflex sight, especially when we're looking at hardcore game modes where we don't have the full heads-up display. Now, having said that, I wouldn't say that you're doing it wrong if you're using a Reflex instead of an ELO sight, because, like I said, it is personal preference to an extent. There are certain guns in certain situations where I really like that frame around my optic because it helps me center my target on screen a little bit better. But there's really technically nothing that supports this, it's just personal preference. I'd love to know in the comment section below, if you have to choose one of these sights, the Reflex or the ELO, which one would you choose most often? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.